Hey everyone, welcome to the Hobby Grotto. I grew up loving Egyptian stuff, so I'm a big fan of Tomb Kings. But of all the Tomb Kings miniatures, my favourite are the Ushabti, and today we're painting some. There are three main base coats to lay down here, starting with Gehenna's Gold, and you never have to be too neat with base coats. I think speed is actually more important. Just try and stay in the lines as best you can, but we can cover up any mistakes with the subsequent colours. Gehenna's is my go-to gold because I like the way it has some rich red to it, so it maintains a strong gold look as I mix up the highlights, but you can use any gold for this really. Whatever you've got in your collection will probably work just as well as Gehenna's Gold. Next up, this mini has bandages and robes, and I'm basing all these with XV88, which I'm eventually going to build up to a bone colour. This is a common way I paint robes anyway, but for the Ushabti, it will, help tie them in with the swarms of skellies, which will also be in this army, because I'm going to be keeping all the flesh of the Ushabti, if you can call it flesh, black. Now it's time for our feature colour. I'm using Sybarite Green, but I always encourage people to use their own colour schemes to match their army if appropriate, so you could easily substitute this green for a more classic blue or red look. My original Tomb Kings were painted in a green theme, so I'm continuing that look here, and also so they'll match some of my contemporary undead minis. But mainly I just love green. As with all the base coats, you want to be keeping the paint nice and thin so you don't clog any detail in these early stages. That's very important. You may even want to do 2 coats with this base coat to get them nice and consistent. Just a little detail here, I'm painting the tiny scarabs with bright silver because later on I'm going to come back and add some contrast paint so they maintain a bit of a metallic shine. Again, this is one of those things that's optional. You could just paint these black or blue and be done with it, but I wanted to create a bit more contrast with these so they don't get lost on the Ushabti. Now that the base coats are all done, we're going to add the wash, Nuln Oil of course, but you could also use a dark brown wash here. I don't want to push people too much with the Nuln Oil, but I do think it's the most useful colour when talking wash. It just kind of works with everything. Remember, if you see any pooling, make sure to move it around with your brush before it starts to dry. Alrighty, the wash is all dry here, which means it's time for some layers. Let's do the robes first. I'm starting here with a 50-50 mix of XV88 and Ushabti Bone, and I'm going to slowly build this up until I'm ending with some final white highlights. This kind of building of layers may seem a bit excessive, but when working with light colours over a black undercoat, it's just something you're going to have to do. Plus the brown tones create a really nice shade for anything that's going to be cream or white in colour. Now, of course, if your model is mainly going to be these lighter colours, you could always undercoat white, but I just prefer the shading that comes from a black undercoat and also how it works with some colours like metallics. Overall, I just think the black is generally the better option, even when you have some lighter colours on the model too. I'm feeling incredibly inspired with all this old world stuff at the moment. It takes me right back to the 90s and 2000s, so let me know in the comments if you've started yet with your old world painting and what projects you're working on. Who are the Tomb Kings people out there? I want to hear from you. For the green, I'm quickly coming back and tidying it up a bit with the base colour. This is not always necessary on small areas like this, but I think it's a good practice anyway because I want to keep the tone of this green without losing it too much in the highlight phase, and this is just going to kind of reinforce that because the colour that I'm using, Gorse Green, to mix in for the highlights, it's got a lot of white to it, and that's just going to kind of desaturate the colour a bit more. This next level of highlights with the 50-50 mix is just being applied fairly sparingly before I come back with the pure Gorse Blaster Green for the edge highlights. And I think that's probably enough layers of highlights, but you can also mix some white with the Gorse Blaster and go a bit further if you want. It's really easy to get carried away with highlights, so just kind of do your highlights based on what you're painting the miniature for. If you're painting it for the tabletop, you don't have to get too carried away. If you're painting something for a bit more of a display or to sit on the shelf, you might want to go a bit further with the highlights. It's going to be really kind of up to what the miniature is for. Now you may be thinking to yourself, true metallic paints have shiny pigments, they don't need any highlights. And I do agree on small areas, but for larger areas of gold color, I like to bring it up a bit with some highlights to not only tone down the gold a bit, but also because I think gold works well with some silvery highlights, particularly on the edges. It gives it that edge, you know. Sorry. But seriously, I like to use a 50-50 silver mix for the first level of highlights, and then some strategic edge highlights with a bit of silver. My go-to here is Runefang Steel, but a lot of different silvers would work perfectly for this purpose. I've used Ironbreaker as well for this in the past. Black can be a tricky colour to highlight because you don't want to get too carried away and turn it into a grey, so I'm keeping all the highlights fairly dark here and just adding some lighter ones on the most extreme surfaces. I do see a lot of people painting the skull portion of the Ushabti in a bone colour, and that's more than fine. I think maybe they're kind of sculpted a bit that way, so if you want to do that, I have a lot of bone related videos on the channel to have a look at. I just kind of think they look more like a Egyptian style statue with that black obsidian look. I'll also be coming back at the end and adding some bone to the teeth to give them a bit more pop. This will also help the face have a bit more visual interest too. Hey, remember the scarabs? I have to quickly come back and add a bit of a Kellyan green contrast paint to them. This will give them some shine, and it's a similar technique to what I used for my Alpha Legion Marines to keep that metallic look. Quite appropriate for the shell of a scarab, I reckon. And there we have a finished Ushabti. Thanks for watching, everyone. Why don't you check out some of these other videos, and we'll see you next time on the Hobby Grotto.